right, welcome to What's in the Box with Eric and Donna. Of course, I am Donna.
And I'm Eric.
We don't want anybody to get confused. So Eric was just at AuthorCon in Richland, Texas, right? Richland?
Yep.
So
Richardson,
right?
Yeah, outside of Dallas.
So he did his first convention and said it went well.
Yeah, it went really well. I was very pleased. It was cool to meet people, and the authors were great. And I think it's just going to grow. I know that everybody there was excited and wants it to get to be like an annual event, like where we get a traditional event that people travel to. So, and I think it has the potential to do that. There's some really cool people there.
Yeah, conventions are good, but us introverts, man, we got to practice at it.
Yeah, it's going to take me a year to get over it. I think there's a lot of introductions, handshaking, and talking, and and I was like, "Ooh, I was tired." The fact that we had to delay the podcast a little bit just so I could get my voice back. So
yeah,
I'm glad we did.
He's back to his old self. He's got his voice back. So let's get into what are we doing this week? What are we looking at in the box? Today we are going to go over the different subgenres of horror. This is actually something I've really been looking forward to discussing because sometimes the lines are not clearly defined on the different genres. And I personally don't know all the different genres off the top of my head. I can kind of guess. Some of them are easy, like Splatterpunk. I know that off the top of my head. But it's just nice to see what those different genres are or subgenres, and we'll have some examples of the different subgenres. So
I was just saying, by no means are we going to cover all the genres. I think we limited it to 10. Some of them, we'll talk about stuff within those genres because as you break it down, you can really get specific if you want to. But we are going to probably talk about the 10 most popular or close to the most popular, and just go over that. But yeah, of course, we're probably going to miss your favorite subgenre, so you can always go down in the comments and let us know what it is that we knuckleheads forgot to talk about. Maybe we'll bring it up in a different episode. But
yeah, I'd be interested if we've forgotten any, because it may be something I haven't read before, and I'd really like to, maybe take a deep dive into that specific genre. So,
and I'm thinking it's most likely it's going to be a subgenre of a subgenre because I really do feel like we hit on all the high notes. But again, those are something. I mean, there are whole sections of dinosaur erotica out there, so there are things for everyone.
There are definitely things for everyone.
So
what is it? I kissed COVID or something like that.
Oh yeah, I think there's a whole thing of COVID.
Yeah, I kissed COVID or COVID. I don't know.
Yeah, if it's happened ever, there's a series or a genre about it. So like I said, we'll probably touch on most of everything, but if there's something we've missed that you're just curious about, please let us know.
Yeah. So let's go into looking at. So these are the 10 subgenres that we are going to be discussing. Gothic horror, and this one is one that kind of confuses me a bit. I don't, off the top of my head, I know like 2 examples, and that's pretty much it. But I'm sure there's plenty more examples, more modern examples.
Yeah, and I think, and I'm sure while we're doing this, the easiest way for us to do it is we're going to jump back and forth between books and movies as we discuss these genres. Because when we go with Gothic horror, I can probably rattle off a ton of different movies that would fall under this, and then we would just have to find a book equivalent. But it'll give us an idea of what we're looking for when we discuss it. Most of these, I mean, I can give you a movie for every one of these genres. I think most of us could. That thing. So
paranormal horror, non-supernatural or psychological horror, body horror, which is actually kind of my favorite, splatterpunk extreme, erotic horror, cosmic and Lovecraftian horror, bizarro, comedy, horror, and apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic. I can't say those words
You
ever.
nailed them. You stuck them. You stuck both of them.
Horror. And then our final one that we're going to look at is true crime horror, which that actually to me could almost be the worst.
Oh, definitely. Like, and you know, when I was younger, my son was younger, he loved Scooby-Doo. And I would always be like, you know, if anytime we got to something that he felt was scary, I would say, hey, don't worry, buddy, it's Scooby-Doo scary, you know. But the more you think about it, that's real scary because it was always a dude or a
Yeah.
lady, you know, it was a human monster. And those are
Yep.
10 times worse than some of these other ones. So
Yeah. Yeah. So what we've done is we've actually just went and taken the literal description of these subgenres, just as so we can have like a starting off point. We didn't want to make up our own words to describe the genre. Of course, we'll do that as we're discussing. So I'll just end up reading off the description. So for Gothic horror usually combines fiction, horror, death, and at times romance. In the 18th century, it became emerged with the rise of Romanticism. So of course, the two that come off the top of my head when I think of Gothic horror is, of course, Frankenstein and Dracula. But I see you actually put in The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson.
I was gonna say, if you wanted to switch over to that card, we can point out the covers and the.
Oh, you're not seeing it?
No, right now I still see the 10 subgenres. I don't see the other thing.
I thought I had shared my whole screen.
Yeah, and so what I did.
There, can you see it now?
Yep, there it is.
Okay, good.
Okay, so what I had done was I looked up, you know, classic examples of the genres to find covers. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually kind of surprised to find The Haunting of Hill House on there as one of the ones. So I kind of included it so that we could kind of discuss it. Dracula would of course be a perfect example of a Gothic horror, but it also fits under some of the other ones. So I'm pretty sure I probably moved it. I'm not sure. I be honest with you, we did this so long ago, I don't remember where I put on the cards, but I have a feeling Dracula pops up somewhere else. I didn't want to double up on any of these, but I did notice that many of these titles could be examples for 3 or 4 different subgenres.
Oh, for sure.
But and I want to say the reason that The Haunting of Hill House would be considered Gothic is because it does a very good job of having it has the Gothic feel of the way the house is, and
Right.
the haunting of the character, and it has that kind of, there's almost a one of the characters in these stories usually has some sort of weird romantic longing or their desire of something that they've either lost or they're searching for. And The Haunting of Hill House definitely has that undertone. But of course, it could easily be a paranormal. You know, it's just how you read it and how you, I guess, you're going to interpret those stories. I think you're right. I think the best 2 examples would be Frankenstein and Dracula, and anything that comes out of the 18th century, 19th century kind of stuff. But it's cool to see that, like, I have the one by Darcy, and then also the Mexican Gothic.
Right.
By that one came out within the last year, maybe 2 years, and so it's good to see that there are some examples of it coming out within the last 5 to 10 years. I think Darcy's book might be 5 to 10 years old.
I'm looking up. There's another one that I think may be a book, and I'm just trying to look at. So Carmilla is one that I heard about as I was reading another book, vampire book, and Carmilla was actually before Dracula. It was written by Sheridan Le Fanu, an Irish author. It was written actually in 1872, which was 26 years before Dracula. And I had read The Root of Ice and Salt, which I personally would consider a Gothic horror, because it's all about the voyage of the Demeter, which, if you know Dracula, you know that's the ship that he was on that
Sure.
brought him to England. So it was all about the captain of the Demeter and what him and his crew experience with Dracula on board.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of times the Gothic horror has an undertone of the supernatural, haunting of something. And of course, that can go back to the haunting of the character longing, the loss of love or somebody's life or some freedom or whatever it is that their main subject is on the story. I have quite a few Sherlock Holmes books where he meets up with Dracula. I would consider probably those would fall under Gothic horror, since Dracula's a character and they focus on that kind of stuff. Dr.
Yeah.
Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I think, would be a good example,
Oh,
although I
yeah.
think he comes up in other sections too. But I mean, if almost, and I think in part of the reason we may have it stuck in our head that it needs to be in the Victorian age is because that's when, as it says here, it kind of got pushed out there as the popular literature, the popular fiction
Right.
of the time. This is the Penny Dreadfuls, all that stuff. Almost all that's Gothic stuff. That's why I wanted to make sure that we had examples that didn't fit into that puzzle box. Shirley Jackson, that was written in like 1950. Mexican Gothic was written, like I said, a couple years ago. And I should have looked up the Fulcroft Ghosts, but I know for a fact she's been doing stuff over the last 10, 15 years. So it's got to be that. Now, if I was going to go with movies, the movies that pop into my head when I think Gothic horror, I'm thinking like the Vincent Price movies, like The Pin and the Pendulum, all the Poe movies. If you take the Poe aspect out of it, many times it's just the title. Those are Gothic. I mean, it's the big house, it's the dungeons, it's the people losing their sanity and hauntings, and sometimes real or imagined. And every one of them tied in with somebody dying important to Vincent Price's character or whoever happens to be the main person. Usually it's Price, so we're talking about the Poe stuff. Any of those movies from the 50s and 60s, a lot of the Frankenstein, of course, the Hammer stuff, all of their things that they came out when they reinvented Universal Monsters and they put all that stuff out. They really captured a Gothic horror theme. You're talking about lightning, old houses, a lot of wind, all that kind of stuff. And I'd be honest with you, they're fine, but it's not anything I look for. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not going to rush out and grab the newest Gothic horror story thinking that this is the one we need to check out. So
so this is the root of Ice and Salt. I think my background blur is kind of making it not work out so well. But it's actually written by a Mexican author, and it's fairly recent. It was just translated into English in 2021, and I think, I can't remember what year it was actually published. I think it was 15 years ago that it was actually originally published in Mexico. And now it's just recently been first published in 98. So 1998, which is a long time ago, unfortunately.
I know that's scary when you think about it, really.
Yeah, so it was just recently translated into English. And so if you like a good Gothic horror, this is actually a good one to read. The Root of Ice and Salt.
Yeah, it keeps going in and out. I think your background is taking it over.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, the Fulcroft Goats. I've read some Darcy Coates, and I'm not really a fan.
Yeah, I have not, but I've heard, some people like it, some people don't, but but I'm just not big into the Gothic, especially the newer stuff. I'm just not big into the
I've only read
romanticism of it.
Yeah, I've only read two of hers, not the full Croft Ghosts. And they were basically pretty similar. It was a young woman who either buys or inherits this large house that ends up being haunted, and she's got to fight this ghost or learn how to
Yeah,
fight
see,
off the ghost.
and to me, that's Gothic horror in a setting of
Mm,
whatever the word is I'm looking for, a present setting. But
yeah,
it also could be paranormal if you wanted to look at that,
yeah,
uh, and then we'll figure out. I don't know. Like I said, I don't mind reading the classics. I'll dip my toe every now and then. I have read The Haunting of Hill House. I wasn't, it was just a book, but I'm sure if I reread it, maybe with fresh eyes, it'll be something different. I do
yeah.
enjoy Frankenstein. I read a lot of it as a kid, but as a kid, you sometimes will get versions that are dumbed down because you're
Hmm.
for kids. So when I was very young, I had tons of different versions of Frankenstein, but I've always been a big fan of the story and the monster.
Yeah. Have
So
you read the Dean Koontz
I have not read his series,
series?
no. And I hate to say it, I'm not a fan of Dean Koontz. I tried to read him when I was younger and
Yeah,
I hated it. I just recently read Phantoms and
yeah.
it was okay. So maybe I will try and get in there. I haven't even seen the movie. I've always wanted to see it. I like the actor they cast in it, but every time I go to see it, it's no longer on Netflix or whatever, and so I have to wait. So
Oh, yeah.
I'm not gonna pay for it, but I will look for the other stuff. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Excuse me. I was just curious if it still had that gothic element to it.
Well, looking at the movie, it doesn't. It's more action packed and stuff. But
Yeah.
I feel like if you're going to do any justice to the character, you still have to have some of that gothic idea there.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't have the books here. I have a book. I want to say it's called Frankenstein Unbound, and I think there might no, that actually is the Dean Koontz one. I think there's a guy that writes a Dracula and a Frankenstein book, and they're both reimaginative visions of it. And I want to say the Dracula one is more about demons and stuff, and the Frankenstein one is more about alien invasion and all that stuff. And so it's got a gothic feel to it, but it twists it to something
Right.
else. I'll have to go find the title so that we can actually post those up there. But yeah, no, I'm not. I like a gothic horror movie more than I would sitting down and try and do a gothic horror read.
Yeah. I enjoyed it's not a movie, or was it? I think it was like a mini series, The Haunting of Bly Manor. I would personally consider that. I think it was a Netflix series.
I think
Um,
it is a Netflix series.
yeah. Of course, you got the lavish mansion, giant house. It's haunted. You have um, lover, a star-crossed lovers or whatever you want to call them. So it has all that feel to it. Um, I would definitely consider that a gothic.
There's
And
a perfect example of gothic. Tom, was it Hiddlestaff? Is that the guy that plays? No, Hiddleston. He,
Hiddleston,
yeah,
Huddleston.
he was in a movie, and I should know this off the top of my head. I'm still wiped out from the convention, but um, what's his name? Guillermo del Toro, the
Hmm.
director. He came out with it. It was called Crimson something.
Oh, Crimson Peak.
Yeah, that is a gothic horror movie, and that's a
Yes.
gothic horror story. If you find a book that's like that, that's right there, 100% perfect example of gothic horror. And that's what he was doing. He was trying to make that kind of a movie, and so he went and studied everything and wrote the script and got it all. He hits all the right notes. He covers every single cliche and everything you would need to make a gothic horror film slash story. He's captured in that movie. That's the perfect example in my head.
Yeah. All right. Next up is probably the most popular or the most common is paranormal horror. Excuse me. Includes supernatural stories, dark fantasy, and ghost stories. The defining feature is the elements that do not exist within scientific realm drive the plot forward. These stories usually comprised of ghosts, apparitions, monsters, aliens, zombies, etc., Common themes can be a haunting, possession, invasion, or curse.
Now, this is what when we got the definition, I kind of disagree. I almost feel like this should be two different genres because I feel like paranormal haunting stuff is one thing, and then creature stuff is the
Is
zombie
something different.
monsters,
Yeah.
aliens, you know what I mean? And so I felt like, well, I'm okay us combining the two because, of course, that's what the definition is. And when I did a lookup, it did cover. Basically, I would type, I would search for it. It would send me to Goodreads every time because somebody's made a list, and then
Oh,
I could go
yeah.
through different people's lists and see if anybody had anything that stood out that I thought was really cool. So, but as I was going through it, everybody's paranormal list did have the inclusion of both monsters and haunting stuff. So I was like, okay, I get it. But in my mind, I think of them as two totally different things.
So
If
do
I
I. So
if
do
I want
I.
to haunt, if I want, you know, possession or a haunting or a house or something like that, that's totally different than me wanting to go read about, um,
Werewolves or
werewolves or
vampires.
aliens or any of
Hmm.
that other stuff. However, you're right. I think it has to be the most common subgenre because it covers 99% of everything people are writing. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. When somebody says, I do a lot of recommending on Facebook. And when somebody says, "Oh, I'm looking for a paranormal horror," I'm automatically thinking hauntings,
mhm,
ghosts. I'm thinking The Exorcist or The Shining. Um, but then when somebody says, "I want a monster book or a creature feature," I'm already, I'm thinking of, you know, The Goat Man, or I'm thinking of Wendigo or werewolves,
right.
things like that.
And you can see if maybe I subconsciously I did it, but three of the four here are more paranormal, like haunting stuff than it is
Right.
creature stuff. I think I probably got three of them down and thought, oh, I need to make sure I include something drastically different with the fourth one.
Yeah.
Uh, but I mean, yeah, we could sit here and list. But you know what? The other thing I thought as I was putting this up, and then we start to go to the other things, many of the books that we're going to see as examples in the other cards would fit here.
Hmm.
And as you know, because you sent me the definitions and suggestions, and so I was looking at those, and then I would look them up and cross reference them, and I was surprised at how many things in this second group would cover everything. So,
Yep.
so this is probably the broadest of the subgenres, but it's got a lot of the good stuff in it. I mean, uh,
Who
The
doesn't love
Shining,
zombies?
right? And then I didn't even put that up there, and then it was funny at the convention, like three of the writers were zombie centric.
Yeah,
So,
I
and
know
then you've got
Jamie Hernandez. I've read
and
her urban gridlock, and that was
um,
pretty good.
yeah, there was a lot of really interesting, cool stuff that I can't wait to dig into. And then, but so when I came, not a lot of people talk about Ghoul in any of the groups with Brian Keene. So I thought, I'll pull that out. That's a cool coming of age monster,
Is it?
supernatural kind of thing. Um, Out of his stuff, I mean, it's funny because we could have picked, there's so many different things you could have picked that for Brian that would fall under this. I mean, he's got the Rising series. I could have easily done Rising or Deep Sea, which was a
Mm-hmm.
zombie, out at where they try and go out to they try to go get on a boat so they can get away from all the zombies. And they're going to an island, so it's kind of a traditional, I guess, story idea, but he has a good twist. Brian has a really good twist on his ideas because the zombies aren't straight up zombies; they're more possessions.
Oh, okay.
So it's the undead is just the reanimation by spirits coming from hell.
Oh, that sounds
And
very
so
attractive.
and so if you read The Rising, and I can't remember the second one, that was my introduction to Brian Keene as I read The Rising. In fact, it's kind of my baptism into the extreme horror was I found Richard Lehman, Brian Keene, and Jack Ketchum at the same time, and went from I didn't know anybody wrote anything to I can't believe these guys are writing this stuff, you know.
I
And
can't
so I was
believe
like,
they're publishing this stuff.
right. I was kind of like, oh, we can do, oh, we're allowed to write this and they'll publish it. I was shocked, you know. And
Hmm.
now we're at the point where you can just publish it yourself. But at the time, you know, 20 something years ago, I was like, oh, I didn't know we could do that. I didn't know there were people out there that were willing to take a chance on these kinds of stories and put them out there for us.
Right.
Um, so yeah, if you like creature stuff, I would suggest The Rising or you know ghouls. I know it's popular within the people that like Brian Keene, but I never hear anybody talk about it in any of the Facebook pages or anything really. So I figured I'd
Wow.
throw it in there. It just seems like, and I'm sure they do. Maybe I'm just missing it, but I just never
Yeah.
see anybody mention any of that stuff. I didn't really want to include Stephen King on any of these pages because everybody knows Stephen King, and so I thought, well, we should introduce other things or reinforce other writers.
Hmm.
But I don't think you could talk about paranormal horror without talking about The Shining.
Right.
Because I mean, it's got so many great elements within the story that hit on all these little, you know, points within this definition. So I think couldn't go. I mean, you could ignore a lot of the stuff he does if you want to, but I think The Shining is it probably is my favorite thing he's done.
Yeah. Have you read any Joe Hill? Because I have Heart-Shaped Box, but
I have
I've not read it.
Heart Shaped Box was my first one, and I think it's brilliant. And I read Horns, and I think it's better, but it's a different kind of read. I also read Lock and Key, probably the first, probably the first two graphic novels. So it's probably 12 issues of Lock and Key, and I think that was pretty interesting. But that's a comic book, so you know you
Yeah.
get the added benefit of visuals to it. Now, I really enjoyed Heart Shaped Box. Um, I know some people think it's kind of you know just sort of okay, but I think if you did like it, you would really like it, and it's a good ghost story, and that's something that I hadn't read in a long time, you know, because I went, like I said, I discovered Layman and those guys at one point. Well, then you're reading that stuff for a long time because
Right.
there's a lot of it, and then you'll branch off and find more people within the subgenre. But I hadn't read anything other than extreme for so long, so I found it to be a breath of fresh air. Um, when I read Heart Shaped Box because it was a little different, and I enjoyed the characterization. And I don't know if I want to say I understood, but the main character, I think he was about the age I was, or maybe a little older, and so I kind of see, I guess, see myself in those shoes. You know, I'd have to be a rock star and all that stuff because that's the main character's an aging like metal star, like the lead singer of a band or something. You know,
Yeah.
you kind of picture not the Ramones because they were too punk, but you're thinking more like maybe the lead singer of the Cult or Guns N' Roses, something like that. That kind of a guy. You know,
Yeah.
that's kind of all had everything handed to him and stuff. But he's having all these weird existential crisis and stuff and his weird relationships with how he deals with people and stuff and so you can kind of see where he's going and the whole time dealing with this curse slash haunting that's going on. So I
Right.
thought it was an interesting read. um, we're going to discuss The Exorcist in a week,
Yes.
so I don't want to dive into my thoughts yet,
Yep.
but I
That's
noticed
fine.
that you are already watching the movie, which would be our
Yes.
discussion for the next week.
I'm
So
doing my homework.
wait, I'm way behind though, because I'm only like halfway through the book, but I need to knuckle down so that I'm ready for everything. But yeah, I was gonna say, I haven't seen the movie in a long time, but, uh, and this will be the first time I've read the book since I was maybe 11. So I have drastically different thoughts from when
Oh,
I
I'm
read it the
sure.
first time. So, but we can get into that next week.
Yeah, definitely. Alrighty. We have number 3 is non-supernatural or psychological horror. In these novels, there are no supernatural forces at work. The element of horror comes from dreading the unknown and our day-to-day fears. These stories are scary because they reveal how plausibly the fictional events can occur in our daily lives. And definitely, my eye goes right to Misery because everybody calls me Annie Wilkes.
Oh yeah.
for Dan Volpe. So, and that is a completely 100% human bad guy, bad woman.
Yeah, and you know what? I would probably, and I, what, one card later, there's another Stephen King book, and I was like, but you really can't discuss psychological horror
Hmm.
and not discuss misery.
Yeah.
Which, and I would, maybe that is the second best book in my mind for King, and maybe we should do that one thing. I know we've discussed not really talking about King, but maybe we need to do a countdown of
Yeah.
our individual, put them in a ranking or something. But yes, the characterization in Misery is 100% um, perfection when it
Yep.
comes to her, how crazy she is about everything she wants done.
Yeah. And I mean, what's more terrifying than being, you know, helpless and you can't get out and this person
Yeah.
wants you to write and you're just like, I just want to go home, and they're doing all kinds of horrible things.
And while doing it, they're doing it in their mind as if they are loving you,
Yep,
and
because they
that's
love you.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an
Yeah.
amazing thing because everything she's doing is for his own good. And
Hmm.
so when you hear and think stuff like that, you can see people in everyday life especially when you look at the news and stuff, and you see these people that do these crazy, insane things, and you're like, well, and how do they do this? And in their mind, they're doing it because they think it's what's best for that other person.
Right.
And totally ignoring all of the psychotic behavior that they're doing. Now, on the last card, it discussed monsters and stuff as being paranormal, but I could easily see some of those monsters falling into the non-supernatural aspect because we don't know. Like, would you consider Bigfoot to fall under this stuff or the last card? Because in my mind, he should be under this card.
Yeah, I mean, cryptids are really their own thing. I mean, I'm surprised there's not a
Well,
sub.
see, and I think they thought when they made that definition for the second card is that cryptids would fall under that. They are
Yeah.
monsters, and so as a monster, they should be, supernatural and because they can't be proven to exist, even though people may think they have evidence of it being there. But then
Right.
we read this definition, and it says dreading the unknown. Well, obviously, it's not known if there's really Bigfoot running around trying to have sex in New York or wherever those things are.
Yep.
And so we have to, I think, include some of the cryptids at least into this side. But and that's part of the reason why I put the ruins in here. Well, it was on, like I said, everything was on a list, but I chose the ruins because I guess you could sort of say it's supernatural, but in all honesty, it's just nature doing its thing. But if you haven't read The Ruins, to me, The Ruins is a top 3 book. I love The Ruins. I think it's
Yeah,
one of the
I've not
greatest books ever
not
written.
read it.
He's not a horror writer. I don't even know if you could call him a writer. I think he only has, like he does other things. Like he's written The Ruins, he wrote A Simple Plan, and I think he does a lot of screenplays and stuff. So I'm not saying he's not a writer. What I'm saying is he's not a guy that cares or has this need to constantly put stuff out and do all that. But good Lord, when he does put something out, it blows your socks off. And so Scott Smith, The Ruins, is one of my go-to books. I love that book.
Yeah, and there's a movie based on that, right?
Yeah, and
Because I have seen the movie.
they get it close, but some of the aspects without being able to be inside the characters' heads, you lose it a little bit with the movie, but the idea is the same.
Mm.
And I mean, just you want to talk about hopelessness and kind of having to accept your fate and dealing with not understanding what's going on. That I think he does a great job of capturing all of those.
Yeah.
And of course, any serial killer book that's fictional, I think would fall under this one.
Oh yeah.
We got
Yep.
that. So as Silence of the Lambs, I never considered Silence of the Lambs horror until the last year. I've noticed that a lot of people consider Hannibal Lecter a horror figure, and they also will always mention Silence of the Lambs as a top horror movie and a horror novel. I always
Yeah.
just thought of it as it always felt, I guess I've always considered serial killer books just to be more crime aspects, and I've never thought of them as uh, as horror, but so many people do. I figured I'd throw it on there because I think that fits in. Hannibal Lecter fits in perfectly with the definition.
Yeah, and then there's the other guy, Wild Bill or whatever his name
Yeah,
is. Um,
yeah,
so you have kind of two things going, two serial killers.
right. And of course, if you ever read the Thomas Harris books,
Mm-mm.
he's so Hannibal Lecter's in all of them, and so he's kind of the linchpin. You know, he plays a bigger part in Silence of the Lambs on, but even Red Dragon, he's in it. Um, the main character does the same thing Clarice does in Silence of the Lambs. They go and talk to Hannibal Lecter because he either has insight or whoever they're hunting is somebody they think he has contact with or something like that. I haven't read it forever, but so to me, it's always just been a psychological crime thriller in my mind, but I guess everybody thinks it's a horror movie. The reason
Yeah.
I can kind of gauge it, the way I gauge stuff as horror or not horror is if my wife has seen it. So if she's sat down and purposely watched something, and she's seen Silence of the Lambs way before she met me, and a couple times since, and so I always thought of it as just whatever it is. But I get
Yeah.
it. I get how you could see that. I think Psycho
Oh,
by a block is way more horror than it is psychological crime, whatever. I think he does a much, and that's based on uh, a real serial killer. So
yeah. Psycho is it, I think that one's more terrifying because it shows people what happens the way you're brought up. Like
right,
his mother was like psycho, and what is that going to do, to this person? And I just read, it's funny we're talking about this because I just read Raised by a Killer by C. Commissar.
uh-huh.
And it's basically about this little girl who's 4 years old who's raised by a serial killer.
Yeah, and I think her series it jumps ages. She
Yeah, the
has more
next
than
one,
one.
yeah, the next one is age 7. Um,
Yeah,
so it's just like if you're raised in this environment, not saying, Norman Bates' mother was a serial killer, but because I haven't read the book, but I have, of course, seen the movie. But it just goes to show you what your environment can do to you,
right.
what it can turn you into. And of course, he goes, dresses up like his mother, and
Well, yeah, he has to become her.
yeah,
She's his everything, and
yeah,
so when she does um, pass, he jumps in there and has to become the character itself. Otherwise, well, I guess his mind fractures. He can't
yeah,
handle the pressure of it and stuff. So that's good to know. That we'll have to add that to the list because it's a good book. It's well done. We can read both of them if you want. Psycho 1
yeah,
and 2. He did a good job with both of those. Um, yeah, no, she's amazing. She's one of my favorites.
yeah. I really
Yeah.
enjoy her stuff. Um, all right, number 4, body horror. This is my favorite. Um, this genre illustrates in vivid details graphic violations or mutations of the human body. This genre usually overlaps with zombie fiction, monster, or slasher horror. Um,
And
so
I was just say that's how I normally think of it. I think of body horror as a subgenre of just splatterpunk and extreme horror. But
yeah, yeah. So my pick was The Jigsaw Man by Gord Rallo, and it basically is about this homeless guy who is offered money to let this other guy cut his arm off. And I think it was like $1 million. And he says, sure, why not? If I have $1 million, I don't need 2 arms, right?
right,
And I'm homeless, so what could it hurt? But then things just keep progressing, and it's not just cutting off his arm. So yeah, it's definitely an example of body horror.
and you know what? Going back to C. Commissar, she has the series about the game show, where how much would you allow somebody to? Would you do something to yourself for money? And
Oh,
it's mutilation basically. But she takes the idea of the extreme game show and what people would be willing to watch on TV and what people would be willing to do to themselves for money. And so that's an interesting read too. And she really gets into it, and she's pretty graphic when it comes to the mutilation part stuff. So if
Yeah.
you're big into that, if you're big into that kind of stuff, you definitely need to be reading her C. Commissar stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Now, I don't know much about Necroscope. I do know it's vampires. I've read the first 100 pages of the first book, and I put it away about a year and a half ago, and I had no desire to go back to it. I do know a lot of people love the series. I think it has to do with some sort of vampire mutation within.
Yeah.
And I think it also has maybe some Cthulhu kind of vibes to it. So that's how it falls under this, because it's got the mutations and the experiments that they do on different kinds of people and stuff.
Yeah, I think I tried to read a Necroscope book years and years and years ago, and I just couldn't get into it.
I
know.
love the covers.
Yeah. Oh, the covers are great. So The Thing.
Yeah, Who Goes There? Short. I think it's more of a short story than a novella, but when it came out, that's what it, if you know what the thing's about the movie, basically the same idea. Now, if you were really going to look at what movie comes closest to capturing this book, it's not The Thing, and it's not The Thing from Outer Space that came out in the 50s. It's the 70s Terror Train, or Train of Terror, that had Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. From what I understand, it's the closest to getting the right vibe, but the whole point is mutations and body jumping and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of mutations going on in that.
Yes. So if you go to, but yeah, so I would say Clive Barker, because he was on top of my head because he's the next one, but John Carpenter, he took the body horror and ran with it and gave us probably my favorite horror movie with The Thing. But yeah, so I think he captured it very well, but I could easily just put Clive Barker. Every Clive Barker book falls under body horror, apparently.
Yeah.
So I just threw on Books of Blood, but we could have done The Hellbound Heart. We could have done any of the collections, any of his works. Every single one was on every single list.
Yeah. Now, what do you think? What do you think about Cabal, also known as Nightbreed? What do you think? So there is mutation.
Yeah.
Because Boone mutates into one of the creatures, but then there's also creatures. So it could be paranormal. It could be body horror.
But looking at the definition, it says it usually overlaps with zombie and monster.
Oh, horror. Yeah.
So I'm assuming that, I think it's because it's Clive, it's body horror, right?
Yeah.
Because that's really what he does. But yeah, you're right. 100%. If you watch it, it is a monster movie.
Yeah.
But it has a whole bunch of other stuff. And I think this is where we find out who some of the more brilliant writers might be, as they layer 4 or 5 subgenres into their books, and then you're confused.
Cabal is also a slasher.
Right. And I think you could almost consider it an epic fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
If you take the horrific elements out of it, if you don't want to focus on the horror, it's a pretty daunting world he's created. And you could easily turn that into a fantasy-esque series with all the different levels he's got going on. But yeah, 100% it's a slasher, because the doctor, right? He's going around and he has, but then he ties in with the dreams, and you got the, there's just so many different elements to it. And I really enjoyed the movie. I haven't read the book, so I can't discuss how well the book handles everything, but he did. I thought the movie was great, and it covers all of these different things, and they do a really good job.
Yeah. I love the movie, and Nightbreed is another one of those comfort horror movies for me. The book had some extra stuff, obviously, like some books do. Like there was a scene in a jail, where Boone's in a jail, and I forget what her name is. I call her the Porcupine Lady.
Yeah.
She turns into smoke and like gets him out of the jail.
And I was trying to think. There's a director's cut of Nightbreed out, and
Is there?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure the only version I've seen is the director's cut, and I want to say that scene's in the movie.
Oh,
but
well, now I'm
maybe
gonna
it's
have to
somebody
look
else.
for it.
Yeah, and now right now somebody's screaming at the at their screen saying, "No, you idiot, there isn't." But I'm pretty sure there's a director's cut, and there's like 20-30 minutes longer. And I
Oh,
want to
I'll
say
have
that
to.
jail scene because as you're describing that jail scene, it's familiar, and I'm thinking, yeah, I remember that in the movie. So we'll have to deep dive and see if it's out there.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to look into that. All right, let's go on. Number 5, Splatterpunk extreme horror. This genre is categorized by gory, disturbing depiction of violence, which stands in sharp contrast to the meekly suggestive horror story. An American writer, David J. Shaw, is credited for coining the term splatterpunk. And I like this quote here from Brian Keene. Brian, if you're watching, hi, we love you. Splatterpunk is transgressive and often political or socially motivated. Extreme horror is more violent and boundary pushing. One was an outgrowth of the other, but they are different.
And so I put that on there because nobody knows the difference between the two. You know what I mean? Even the people that write it, I don't think
Yeah,
any of us know. And I'll know many times somebody's gonna say, "Oh, this is splatterpunk because there's this message," and there's not a message. The
right.
writer wrote it, and he thought he was just writing something, and somebody else pulled a message out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So in my mind, splatter, and that's why I'm not a fan of, over the last year or so, some extreme horror is just there to try and people. It seems like people are writing off of a checklist
Yeah,
and they have an idea of what they think it is, and so they make sure they put A, B, and C in their story, and then they say, "I've just written extreme horror,"
mm-hmm.
and a lot of times those stories miss the mark because they're not, it's not a checklist thing. So, but at the same time, yeah, there are some people that are putting um, a political or social idea within their story, and that has the extreme elements to it.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. A good example that I like of extreme splatterpunk um, is Pizza Face by Aaron Beauregard. It's a collection of short stories, but every single story has a theme, and the theme is the consequences of your actions.
sure.
So every single story in that collection, yes, it's a disgusting story and it's violent and everything, but everything that happens is due to um, somebody's actions.
Oh,
You know, you
yeah.
do something and it causes this, and this is what happens.
Well, and
Um,
you could say the same with Billy Silver and Talia, where
yep,
maybe they're more socially or not politically, because it's not a political statement, but the way that Talia is treated and everything that happens to her that leads her to become what she is.
yep, because she's a
Uh,
sex worker, and and honestly, that is what happens. They don't turn into demons. Spoiler alert. But sex workers are treated like that.
sure, and then
You
so
know.
then you have, but then you have her become the thing she becomes, and then she is the central. Um, I don't want to say evil element because Billy's the evil in Billy Silver. He's
Yeah.
just a dirtbag, but his actions in dealing with her, her curse, causes that uh, situation to unfold the way that I'm trying to talk around it without ruining both of the things. It's
Right.
difficult to do. But if Billy wasn't such a dirt bag, if Billy wasn't willing to go that extra mile with the tattoo,
Yeah.
and to do all the things that he does, then he's not going to be marked by Talia. Talia's marking all the people that need to be punished and all that stuff. So,
Yeah.
Lee Franklin with Nang Tai, is that what it is? I
And
always
Nang Tani. Nang.
Nang Tani. Yeah,
Yes.
the Vietnamese
Yes.
tattoo that
Hmm.
possesses the character because he's a dirt bag and he's you
Treating
know
women badly is that.
misogynistic
Yeah.
and violent towards people, and he's anti-gay and he's homophobic and he's all these things. He's all of it wrapped up into one vile character, and then he has to become the thing that he hates the most. as he goes through that whole thing. I mean, that in a way you could say is more splatterpunky than it just straight up extreme.
Yeah.
Like I would never consider anything Ed Lee wrote to be political or socially motivated, but I'm sure it could be a little bit. I mean, if you've read Monstrosity by Ed Lee, um, there are some social aspects to it because it deals with homelessness and stuff and things that are going on, but that's more of a plot point that pushes the story forward than it is a social commentary on the way we treat homeless people.
Right.
Richard Lehman, I never would ever consider to be transgressive or political, social motivated at all. He is 100% just, let's crank it to 11 and see what happens.
Yeah.
But and this is funny because we had dinner before the convention, the day before the convention, and halfway through the dinner, somebody threw out, "Well, I don't understand the difference between splatterpunk and extreme horror," and I don't know if any of us was able to explain it properly. So I don't know how much of a difference there really is. To me, what it means is that when you get this story, there's no holds barred, there's no punches pulled, there's gonna be sex, you're gonna have violence. There's going to be terrible things that happen that you wish didn't happen. All of those are elements of a good extreme horror splatterpunk story, in my mind. And the second you feel somebody pulling away, it's going to have stuff that makes you squeamish and want to pull away. And the writer can't pull punches. You know what I mean? The writer can never feel like he has to edit what he's putting down on the page. It shouldn't ever be a question that did he not write something because it was too much. That if it feels like that, it's not extreme horror in my mind. It's not splatterpunk. It's somebody trying to capitalize on it and they don't get it. So in my mind, you dive in head first if you're the writer, and if you're lucky, you can do it within a way where you get your political or your social point out there.
Right.
When you show people that, hey, this is an issue, a problem, but while it's happening, you're going to be made to be uncomfortable the entire time.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think that's part of it, is to be uncomfortable. And, I really don't have any limits. I've my first ever extreme, whatever you want to call it, was Cows, which I know is on another card, and Mother Maggot by Simon McCarty.
Yes.
So, those are
extreme.
Those are extreme. And so I really can read just about anything. And I don't know if it's because I'm desensitized to it and I'm just like, whatever, some guy, my best friend was telling me about, she read Do Not Disturb by John Nathan, and she was talking about a prolapse. And I'm like, John Nathan.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you know what you're getting into, if you know what the writer is, if you have an inkling of an idea, then none of it should be shocking because you're kind of expecting to be shocked.
Yeah.
My favorite stories right now are all of the psychological thriller groups, like on Facebook, all the book groups that do like mystery novels and cop dramas and those kind of books. For some reason, they've all latched on to Womb but every single one of them are having a difficult time because they don't understand what they're getting into. And I think that's the funniest thing is when somebody stumbles across one of these things thinking it's not true horror or extreme horror, and they think they're just getting into something that might have a twist, and that's not what we're talking about. And so I find those to be the best stories right now because it's hilarious to see these people melt down over Duncan's book about that stuff. So same with Header. I think if people read, a lot of people love to use Ed Lee's Header as their, this is an extreme book you need to read. Patrick Harrison the third put out Grandpappy recently. People
Please, that cover is haunting me.
I told him the same thing this weekend, that the cover was haunting me because I had a family member that had a similar issue. when I was
Uh,
growing up, and it has haunted me all my life. Then he put
It's
it on that list.
constantly in my Facebook feed, and I'm not even friends with him on Facebook.
I know people are excited about, it, but it's like the slob too with Aaron.
Yeah,
Those kind of books, they come out of nowhere and they smack you in the mouth, and those are fun reads. And to me, this is my bread and butter. These are the kind of stuff I like to write and read. So, but when I say I write extreme horror, I'm not writing gross out horror. I'm not
no,
trying to. What I like to write is a story that goes wherever it goes. It's going to have elements of violence. There'll probably be a little sex in there, but it's going to have a story. And that's the stuff that I shy away from over the last year and a half. I've noticed a lot of times it's just people trying to gross you out. And so some people are missing the mark, I think, on what makes a good extreme horror splatterpunk story. But there's
yeah,
still so much good stuff. We just have to weed through some of the other stuff to
yeah,
get to it.
and like Chocolate Man by Jonathan Butcher. Um, people read the description and are like, "Oh my God, it's about a shit demon," right? Well, I read it, and it's actually way deeper than that. It's
And a lot of
disgusting. It's very disgusting, but it is such a deep story. It details how, childhood traumas can impact your entire life and impact your children and like, you think this thing that happens to you when you're a child won't impact your job when you're like 40 or 50 or, your kids, but it does. And it's a
and right
very,
there, I was gonna say
yeah,
that's a perfect example. You're right there. You're saying it. The people on face value will see it as just a gross out extreme horror book, but really that's splatterpunk. It's got a message. It's trying to teach you something
yep.
in a gross out kind of way. So you just
Hmm.
you just gave us the perfect example and definition and
Yep.
explanation with it. So because I haven't read that yet. All I've seen is the cover and people's reaction. So
Yeah.
I hadn't got to it yet. So that's
Yes.
awesome to hear.
Yeah. It's really great. I was actually recently quoted by Killer Bunny Charlie. I don't know if
Oh
you're
yeah.
friends with her on
Yes.
Facebook.
Yes.
My quote is, "Look beyond the poo," when I'm talking about that book.
Yes, I did see it because it was made as an instrument, like an inspirational, wasn't
Yeah, and
it?
I made it my cover
Yeah.
photo too, my
Yes.
cover
Yes, I
picture.
did see that. It was very funny. And yeah,
Yeah.
you know what? Yes, and people need to look beyond it sometimes. Now, some of them are just what they tell you they are.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that I'm having a harder time always embracing because sometimes if it's done well, you can get through it. But I don't know. Like I said, this is, and I think it's because it's my. I've always considered myself more of an extreme person, so
Yeah.
extreme writer. So I always feel a little more protective, overprotective of the genre. But yeah, there are a lot of cool things going on, and just like you said, look past the nonsense and the noise and give it a chance. And some of
Hmm.
these stories are going to blow you away. They are going to have a message that you need to see.
Yeah. Son of the Slob like destroyed me. Um, because it takes like this character who's basically helpless, and you think he's a monster and he does things that are not really that great. Um, and at the end of the book, you're kind of like, well, go Harold, you know?
Yeah.
And he's basically a nonverbal 8-year-old who's, not potty trained. And I'm like, that's my son, you know? And just thinking some of the things that happened to him in the book, I'm like, Jesus, if that ever happened to my kid, I wouldn't have done what Vera did. I wouldn't have been like, oh, well, I'll think about, whatever. So yeah, you take this monstrous character and you think that he's going to be the monster, but he actually turns into kind of like the hero, and the person who's supposed to be the hero or the good figure turns out to not be.
Yeah, and I think a lot of some of the best stories you'll read, you'll have that flip.
Yeah.
A really good writer like Aaron can take that and really play it perfectly.
Yeah.
Um, and it also, yeah, there's nothing more I don't want to say horrifying, but there's nothing more horrifying than when you start to read something and you see something familiar,
Mm-hmm.
and you're like, because there's a lot of times I'll see something that'll pair up with my situation with my son, with his Crohn's and stuff, and I'll be like, it'll hit me 1,000 times harder than I think anybody was expecting it would, at that time, especially me, books or movies or a show, and it'll get you out of things. So when you have stories that hit close to home, and a lot of times you'll find that in the splatterpunk and the extreme horror genre, is
Mm-hmm.
that these guys are really good at doing that.
Yep.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us this week for the subgenres. We decided to split it into 2 episodes so it wasn't so long, and at the end of this episode we wanted to give you a not Stephen King book of the week. And earlier in this episode I had mentioned a book, but I could not remember the name of it, which is embarrassing since the name of the book is I Am Frankenstein by C. Dean Anderson. It's an alternative look at the creation of the monster. So if you're interested in stuff like that, or if you kind of want to see a batshit crazy take on how Frankenstein comes up with the idea of doing all this, then this is the book for you. He also did one for Dracula called I Am Dracula. I didn't enjoy it as much, but if you're a vampire fan, I'm sure you will. So join us next week as we finish up the subgenres, and Donna will have her selection for that week's book of the not Stephen King book of the week. So talk to you guys later.